So, hello, everyone, and hello, fellow blood suppliers for mosquitoes. Welcome to the seventh Citizen Science webinar. This one will be on the topic of mosquito-borne diseases. My name is Liz Burck, and I live in Alaska, and I'm a senior science education specialist at IGES, and I am joining today with a fellow coworker and friend. And so this is our co-host.
Welcome, I'm Cassie Sofing. I'm also with IGES and I'm a senior science educator there also. Well, we'd like to welcome you to the webinar. As you know, it's being recorded. And today is a mosquito vector-borne disease story. And our disease story is like chapters in a book. So we have two of them, one on disease transmission model for mosquito vectors, and then one highlighting a new resource that we've developed called Disease Guide Highlights. And I think you'll enjoy that chapter in particular. So the elements of our mosquito story, we'd like to kind of frame it as a story because we know that so many of our participants come from a library or science museum background. So here's the elements of our mosquito story. We have the characters. They're the mosquitoes, the humans, virus, and parasites. The setting is everywhere except Antarctica. And the plot, it's unintentional, yet it's also often devastating. The events unfold during the species perpetuating quest by the female mosquito for certain proteins that are found in human blood. And then we have conflict because the female mosquito gets the blood protein she wants, and the humans who donate the blood may get a disease that they don't want. And so just like in every good story, sometimes there's some specific words that you have to look up sometime. And so we have some mosquito lingo that's in our story. And just so we're all on the same page when we're talking about a pathogen, it's a biological agent that's the cause for a disease. A vector, which we use often, is an organism that transmits the disease. An arbovirus comes from three words, arthropod-borne virus, and it's just a general term for any virus that's transmitted by an arthropod, such as a mosquito or in some cases a tick. And then parasite is an organism that lives in or on a host. So that was our prologue, and here we go into our first chapter.
Okay, well, to understand this story and to get started with it, we need to kind of set the plot here. And so first of all, we'll start with just a general disease transmission model. So this is just generally how diseases get from one place or one person to another. So in the beginning, there's some source of this virus. We'll just use virus as an example. In fact, let's just use the flu virus, since everybody's pretty familiar with the flu virus. We've probably all housed it in ourselves at one time or another. So this virus is in our bodies. And when we sneeze or cough, or even talk, that virus escapes in our saliva. And so it can land on somebody else. They can inhale some of those droplets. It can land on a surface that that person may touch and then put that virus near their mouth and it enters that way. So the mode of transmission is it comes out of one person and either inhaled or taken in by their hands or whatever, it's transmitted to another susceptible host. So that's a fairly common way that diseases are transmitted. I mean, there's lots of them, but that's fairly common. But in the mosquito story, it's a little bit different. We add a few more little steps here. First of all, we're going to deal with a pathogen. And as Cassie just mentioned, by definition, a pathogen is a disease-causing thing, using the word agent, but it's a disease-causing thing. It can be a virus, it can be a parasite, it could be a bacteria. So the thing that's going to cause the disease. In our mosquito story, the mosquito is going to get that pathogen. We'll talk about how it does that as we go along. But the mosquito is going to get a hold of that pathogen. Once they get that pathogen and they have it in their body, things happen to that pathogen in the mosquito's body. Once that mosquito finds you or a human being and bites you, we'll talk about that term here in a minute too, bites you, that pathogen, let's say the virus, is injected into your body. Unintentionally, nevertheless, it's injected into your body. It's transmitted to you by the bite of the mosquito. And then it takes up residence in this individual person who becomes sick from that bite, from that virus that was transmitted by the mosquito. So the mosquito plays a big role in this story, and so that's where we're going to head off to first here. These arboviruses, again, Cassie already defined arboviruses, viruses transmitted by mosquitoes, essentially. And so there are 5 of them, 5 of these arboviruses, 5 of these viruses. Dengue is a virus. And so that's a computer model of what the dengue virus would look like. Then there's Zika. There's a model of that one as well. You can tell they look a bit different, probably made up of different chemicals, right? There's chikungunya, and there's the model of that. And we also have a model showing the yellow fever and a model for West Nile virus or West Nile fever. Those are 5 of the 6 diseases we're going to be talking about. Those are all transmitted by a pathogen that is a virus. Those are virally caused diseases. So you can see the little spheres are all single viral entities. There's also a pathogen that is not a pathogen, the thing that causes disease. There's also a pathogen that is not a virus. And this one, it looks like a little wormy thing, right? It's kind of weirdo looking, but that's a plasmodium. And plasmodium is the genus of the protozoans. It falls into this category of protozoans in the plasmodium genus. And so that is the one. So it's very different, and it's going to act very different both in the mosquito's body and in ours, but it's very different from the viruses. So this is a plasmodium. And that's going to be the malaria one. So if we look around at, when are we going to have to deal with those pathogens? When are they going to show up in our environment? Well, there's been a lot of research into that, and they've got a lot of data, and it's well represented in this graph that is from climatecentral.org. So we left at the bottom of the page the reference to this one. There is an ideal climate for both the survival of mosquitoes. It's the kind of, this is the climate as a mosquito. This is the climate I really like. And there's also, along with that, the ideal climate for the transmission of those pathogens. Pathogens also have an ideal climate, the climate at which even inside the mosquito's body, they're going to reproduce faster. Mosquitoes are cold-blooded, right? They take on the temperature of their surroundings. So when it's cold outside, they're cold. When it's warm outside, they're warm. And with that warmth comes an increase in metabolism and an increase in their ability to move around and their increase in their reproductive rate. So we're looking at, I'll give you a second to look at this. You could certainly interpret this, and in giving it out to the patrons at your library or museum or in a class that you might conduct with citizen scientists, this would be a great visual, because on the x-axis, you see temperature readings, and those are in degrees Fahrenheit. And then up on the y-axis is your percent probability that these mosquitoes are going to do well under those temperature conditions. So you get it down to 50 degrees, mosquitoes just are not too happy there. They do not do well. They do not survive. They are not active, generally below 50 degrees. Once you start getting up closer to 60, a little bit of activity. getting to 70, you've made a fairly significant jump from 0 to, what would you say, 32 maybe percent. Then as the temperature increases, you're looking at a huge jump from 70 to 80 degrees. And 80 to 90, somewhere in there, is pretty much a peak range for mosquito activity, and therefore also for the activity of the pathogens. So those are important temperatures to keep in mind. So you can kind of even look at those temperatures and look at the temperature where you are. A lot of you commented already in the chat this morning, whoa, we've been really hot and the mosquitoes are horrible. Well, there's a reason for that, because they love those warmer temperatures. They're very active during those warmer temperatures. They reproduce rapidly. Their life cycle steps will go very rapidly. The eggs will hatch into larvae, just a few days, boom, their pupa, few days, boom, you've got more adults. So they also like these warm temperatures. The temperature thing is kind of so important that we also included another graph showing some temperature range stuff here of the 3 species of mosquitoes that we're going to be talking about. These are the 3 biggies in this discussion of diseases. The Aedes albopictus, Aedes is the genus name, always capitalized, and scientific names, genus and species are always in italics. So it's the Aedes albopictus. It has a survival range. We also gave it both in Fahrenheit and Celsius on this one, or chose to use this one because it does have Fahrenheit and Celsius. The peak rates for their life cycle stages, you can see between 73 and 93 Fahrenheit, 2334 Celsius. The culex, and we left it as SP for species. There are a lot of species in the genus Culex that cause a lot of problems here that fall under this category of disease stuff. But you can see their survival range. Again, 50 is about the lowest. They just don't do well under 50 degrees Fahrenheit, corresponding to 10 degrees Celsius. And then they'll go really gung-ho up until about 95. And then again, it falls off. Peak rates for their life cycle, 82 to 89. Their optimized extrinsic incubation period for the selected pathogens. So to incubate those pathogens in their little tiny mosquito bodies, West Nile does best, and West Nile is by Culex mosquitoes, transmitted by Culex. West Nile, 89 degrees. If you look at Aedes aegypti, another genus and species down at the last row across, again, 50, just nothing below 50. Hit 50, start taking off, they'll go up to 102. That's the problem with the Aegypti. They can go to a little bit warmer temperatures. They mutate, they love it. They can get into all kinds of trouble in those higher temperatures. The peak rates for their lifestyle changes, again, a little bit on the lower side to start and the higher end. They have a wider range of peak rates. And then for dengue, 95 degrees is the incubation that the pathogen incubates the best. And at 97, really hot. And Zika goes crazy at 97, incubating in that mosquito's body. So we thought that was pretty valuable information, just so we have a baseline of temperatures to kind of look at and kind of relate to our own environments and the environments in which you are working with citizen scientists, or you as a citizen scientist go out in the field. You got to keep an eye on those temperatures. That's really important. We even ask you to take temperature readings. It gives us important data. So here's a chart you may want to refer back to as we go along.
Along those lines, we wanted to point you to this resource from Climate Central. It's Mosquito Disease Danger Days. And on their website, they have several cities from around the United States. And I realize that we have an international community, but this would just be a starting point for a discussion. But if you pick your city, if you pick your state and your city, and I don't know, just for fun, we could check in Oklahoma. In Oklahoma City, and You have 11 more days, and you are already at 180 plus days from 1970. Now you're up to 191. So you have 11 more days than you did 40 years ago. And so this tool is available, as I said, for several cities around the United States. And it's kind of an interesting tool that you could use. People love to see where they're at, but the y-axis is different for each of the different cities. So even though they look like they're spread out, so check the number of days and then where they are now in 2017.
The other thing that we are very concerned about here, and follows along with all this temperature data, is the climate change issue. And we know that because organisms have a certain tolerance, and we just went through that, mosquitoes below 50, they're kind of out of it. Get up into the 80s, 90s, and for some even into the 100s, that's their tolerance level. That's where they are most active, and it enables their survival. And so when we see those temperatures changing away from the tropics into the subtropics, going north and south of the tropics, then even beyond that, into areas where we're seeing temperatures hitting higher temperatures than in the past. And as we see those temperatures increasing and creeping further away from the equator, we are definitely seeing changes in the presence of mosquitoes, the amount of mosquitoes in certain areas, and the existence of those pathogens. All of this is so closely tied into temperature. So as we watch the climate change, as we keep data, collecting data on that, we get NASA data, we get NOAA data. Lots of people are looking at this issue. We want to look at it from the perspective of now, as people interested in mosquitoes, we want to keep track of it and what it's doing to our local environment and our countries, et cetera, as the climate is changing. Really impactful information.
Before I click on the next slide, I wanted to just give you a little background on it. It's about a 4-minute section of a much longer video that's available on YouTube that you can take a look at. And again, what we wanted to provide you are some illustrations and some graphic examples that you could use also in your presentations. So with the computer, I think I got the audio all checked, but let me know if you can hear it all right.
Chikungunya, or Zika, is capable of transmitting one of the cited viruses. It can infect multiple people during every cycle of egg laying and blood feeding. A female that sucked blood containing viruses is not able to transmit those viruses immediately. Because of the series of interactive events between the virus and the body of the mosquito, with some steps of virus propagation in the insect being necessary. After ingesting infected blood, the virus particles adhere to and penetrate epithelial cells of the insect's stomach. Some hours later, each infected cell starts to release new viral particles that infect neighboring cells. With the passage of time, a period of 2 to 10 days, depending on the virus, all of the stomach epithelium will be infected. In susceptible mosquitoes, the viral particles produced in the epithelium are disseminated by the hemolymph, which is a fluid, and where the virus propagates to other tissues and organs, such as the legs. wings, ovaries, head, nervous tissue, and finally, salivary glands. This dissemination of viruses to secondary tissues, like nervous tissue and salivary glands, is genetically controlled. Its rate is influenced by ambient temperature. Generally, viral particles spread more rapidly when the ambient temperature is higher and take longer when the temperature is low. Although a female can be infected, it does not transmit dengue or Zika before the end of the first spawning cycle after infection. She will begin transmitting or infecting after the viral particles have accumulated within their salivary glands and become present in the saliva, which requires from 8 to 14 days. In contrast, the presence of viral particles in the saliva of mosquitoes infected with chikungunya can occur within 3 days after the ingestion of infected blood. That is, an infected female will feed on blood and spawn several times before being able to transmit dengue or Zika viruses, which requires the mosquito to survive 1 or 2 weeks, much more than is necessary for the transmission of chikungunya virus. Once there are saliva particles in the salivary gland, every time a female feeds on blood, it will inject virus along with saliva. In this way, viruses will be transmitted to new individuals who may or may not present with disease symptoms, depending on their susceptibility, which is determined by their immune status and genetic characteristics. Female mosquitoes will continue to transmit dengue, chikungunya, or Zika over the rest of its life, which can last from 30 to 40 days.
Any thoughts or comments about that video? Put them in the chat. We'd like to hear what you think, if it was valuable information, or if you would possibly be able to, I know it is creepy, if you'd be able to use it possibly in a presentation to your groups.
Species.
The next few charts I have to share with you just kind of show you the number of months per year when transmission of the Aedes aegypti mosquito is possible. And this is 2019 worst case scenario. And so the months that are in the red to orange, 10 to 12 months, so almost year round for these areas. And the global distribution of the Aedes aegypti is in red, and the spread of yellow fever in yellow in Africa, Dengue is spreading throughout the world. Chikungunya also throughout the world and into North America and even up into Alaska. And then Zika.
So we thought it would be interesting here at this point too, to lay out use this graphic to kind of lay out how the Zika virus, we chose Zika, we'll do malaria here in just a minute as well, pardon me, how the Zika virus gets into the human population. And so on the left-hand side, if you look at that diagram, it looks like it goes in a cycle starting at midday at noon, up at the top of the mosquito, drops down to a monkey of some kind, down to a mosquito, back up to a monkey, a chimpanzee, a baboon, some primate, back to the mosquito. That cycle is called the sylvatic cycle. And sylvatic simply means it's in wild animals. It's a cycle in wild animals. And so the Zika virus can be and was for a long time and still is sylvatic. A mosquito bites the monkey, gets that Zika virus from that monkey, then goes on to bite another monkey, transfers it to that monkey, and then this cycle just goes on from mosquito to monkey to monkey to mosquito to monkey to mosquito, like that. But then something kind of weirdo happened in that cycle, in that urbanization kind of came into existence. And what that means is, the building of human populations and the spreading of human populations. And so humans started moving into that wilder environment and traveling through there. And so the mosquitoes would bite them when people started building their cities and villages closer to those wild areas. The mosquitoes just kind of a hop, skip, and jump, and they can be over infecting human beings. So then, because of the building and the water that is associated with a city and the water reservoirs, which we talked about a lot, water, standing water, perfect breeding grounds. So now we've got those in cities also. They jumped into the urban cycle. So now mosquitoes can bite humans, and then another mosquito bites them, gets that virus, the Zika virus, and transfers it to another group of humans. So the other thing that's kind of strange and weird and scary about Zika is that it also, and we'll talk more about this, be transmitted through sexual intercourse, blood transfusions, and in utero, which means from the pregnant female to the fetus while pregnant. So you can see the Zika virus cycle is kind of interesting. It had that wild cycle, and then it also has the urban cycle. A little bit different maybe than the next cycle, which we want to just briefly show you, is the malaria transmission cycle. And so the malaria starts with this plasmodium. Again, we've talked about plasmodium. It is a type of protozoa. Protozoa, first animal. They're very primitive cells. They're one cell big, and but they are a true cell. So when they get picked up by the first vector, the thing that transmits, right? Cassie defined that for us, something that transmits the virus from one place to another, or the plasmodium from one to another, that mosquito picks it up. Then it goes to the initial human host. So the mosquito transfers it to a human. That human, there can be some in utero transmission with malaria, but typically it goes into the human liver, and that plasmodium reproduces in the liver. It gets out of the liver into the blood and infects the blood. Then a second mosquito comes along, takes that blood from that human, right? That's what they want, is the blood, but mixed in with the blood now is that plasmodium, takes the blood along with the plasmodium and goes to the next human host and drops it off there. So that person becomes the next bearer of that plasmodium. And then again, you can follow it on, it gets into their liver, and the cycle continues.
So on to the second chapter of our story.
Right. So this next part is a part we're proud of here. We've been working on this for a bit, and we decided to name it Beyond the Bite. And Beyond the Bite, because we wanted to talk about what happens after that mosquito bites you. What's going to happen perhaps afterwards. And so that's the whole link to the mosquito stuff. So in putting this project together and creating the mosquito habitat mapper, we had many goals in doing that. We wanted you to learn about mosquitoes. We want you to share that information with your citizen scientists. We want you to be able to identify different kinds of mosquitoes. We want you to rid your local environment of mosquito breeding sites. We want to see how your data aligns with scientists' data regarding how mosquitoes are moving in relationship to climate change. But we always looked at, why do we want you to do that? And we've been asked that question a lot. Why do we need to do this? Why should we care about this? We should care about this, learning about them, identifying them, getting rid of their breeding sites, getting data to see how climate change is affecting all this, because mosquitoes, little tiny little insects, are the leading cause of disease and death in the human population of anything in the world. They cause more human suffering and more human death than any other organism. That's why we think this is an important project, so that maybe we can reduce the incidence of these diseases. So embedded in this goal are these diseases, and these are the 6 that are fairly common and that we chose to really put a little emphasis on. Some of these you instantly would have heard of. Malaria, it's been around for so long. It is such a huge problem. It's affecting so many people worldwide that surely I would bet that you've heard of malaria. Some of the others were now, things are changing, but maybe you had not heard of chikungunya. And so we'll talk about that with you here in just a second too. But we're going to talk about West Nile, dengue, yellow fever, and Zika in this Beyond the Bite guide to these diseases. We decided to make it a short guide. It isn't very long. So with each of these 6 diseases, we just give you like 2 or 3 pages worth of very succinct, to the point, give me the basic information. So we wanted to make it interesting for you. We wanted to save you the time of doing the research. There's so much information out there. We thought this could be a time-saving tool for you to use in your efforts to work with the Mosquito Habitat Mapper. It would be very easy to share with others. You can pull it up online and look at it there and print it off, or whatever you wanted to do. So we wanted to go beyond the bite to provide you more information on the diseases that can result from the bite of a mosquito. Prefacing the individual, so we've got individual entries for each of the 6 diseases. But then we looked at it and decided there really needs to be, in this story, there needs to be an introduction. And so we came up with an introduction. So prefacing all the individual disease pages is an introduction that gives you an overview. And again, we kind of went with a storyline approach. Most of us involved in this project are former teachers. We know the power, as you guys do, because you tell stories all the time too, but the power of storytelling. And so with that in mind, we kind of followed that format in putting this together for you. And so we start with, in the introduction, we're going to start with the implications of your work and why it's important to human health. So the things I kind of just talked about. But then in the introduction, we also get into our little chapter. It's going to be entitled The Mosquito Disease Story, the little fly that causes big problems. There's a chapter on the mosquito. The mosquito is not the pathogen. The mosquito is not causing the disease. The mosquito is the pathogen delivery service. So not the mosquito's not the pathogen, but it has the pathogen inside of it and brings it to you. We have a chapter on the female mosquito is truly just trying to be a good mom. She's not trying to be a bad disease-causing insect. She's trying to do something for her babies. But she's going to find you. That's another chapter in this story. She will find you. And when she's going to find you and find your blood, once she lands on you, she's going to find where your blood is, because she's using visual cues, olfactory, smelling cues, and thermal, again, that temperature thing. And we, as warm-blooded organisms, have a fairly high body temperature. They can clue into that as well. We have a chapter on the species that suffers the consequences of all that, and that is us as human beings. We have a chapter on what keeps those mosquitoes around and what keeps those mosquitoes away, going back again to a lot of the stuff on the mapper. And then we also have included a vocabulary list, a bit more extensive than the one Cassie went over earlier, our mosquito lingo. But we thought it would be helpful to have a definition right there when we use a term like pathogen, so that you're pretty comfortable with that. So each of the disease entries contains all of these things that are listed in the left-hand side. So we have a vital point. And this vital point is something that grabbed us when we went to the WHO site, the World Health Organization site, something that moved us, that caught our attention, some astonishing fact or compelling data that we thought, that's just so interestingly, amazingly scary or whatever. And we made it our vital point just to grab interest right there at the beginning. And then we get into the details. We will give you the cause of that disease. Is it a virus? Is it that plasmodium we've been talking about? We'll give you the name, scientific name of the mosquito vector, the Aedes aegypti, the Aedes albopictus, the Culex, SPA, because again, there's lots of those. We will give you the range. Where in the world is this disease showing up? Where is it a problem? We'll talk to you about how it's transmitted. We'll talk to you about the incidence, both the rate or frequency of that disease. We'll give you the symptoms associated with that disease. We'll talk to you about what can be done to treat it, if anything. We'll give you some general information, perhaps maybe where the name originated, things that we thought were interesting that make that story a bit more interesting. And then we get into the history. And we really had to condense that down because the history of some of these diseases is so incredibly interesting. I mean, there are books and books written on the history of some of these diseases. And Cassie will mention these again or talk to you about the toolkit that we list them. But like this one, Fever 1793, a book about the history of yellow fever. And then this one, another one called The Fever, is a big book on the history of some of these diseases that are transmitted by mosquitoes. Going on, we want you to take this information and go deeper with it. So now we know in our storyline, kind of following like when you write an article, right? We know who is transmitting it. We know mosquitoes are doing it. It's mosquitoes that are transmitting these diseases. We didn't know that until 1900. Nobody knew that in some of these diseases. The recording of some of these diseases goes way back, but we didn't know it was the mosquito until 1900. Walter Reed, right? That's a name we're kind of all familiar with. Walter Reed Hospital in Washington, D.C. So he was a military person doing research, discovered that it was the mosquito. And then we know what is causing the disease. We know it's a pathogen. We know it's a virus or a parasite. We know when it's being transmitted during those times of optimum temperature. We know when to expect it. We know where. We can show you a map. It's so much data has come in. We know where these diseases are going to be showing up. We know why they're being transmitted. It's an accident that they're being transmitted because the mosquito is after your blood for her eggs. She's not trying to hurt you, but she's dropping some nasty stuff off in the process. And we know how. We know from that video you just watched, it's going to be injected along with her saliva. When she sticks that proboscis into your skin to find a blood vessel, there's several things that are happening. One of which is she's immediately injecting some of her saliva into your body because it has an anticoagulant in it so that your blood will keep flowing so she can grab it. And it's got painkillers. It has enzymes in there that are painkillers so that you don't feel it. She's going to get away with it before you feel it. So while she's doing that, putting that saliva in there, if that saliva contains those pathogens, that's where it's going to come from. And there are stories associated with each of these diseases that it puts I just wrote these down because they're fascinating. In these stories that you're going to see in here, there's 3.3 billion people at risk for one of these diseases. One of these diseases infects 390,000 people a year. One of these diseases kills 435 people every year, many of them young children. One of these diseases has been killing people since ancient times in China and Egypt and Greece and India. One of these just jumped major into our lives in 2016. One of these has changed history in many countries. One of these led to the start of the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control. One of these, the work done on one of these led to a Nobel Prize for somebody. One of these involves birds in its transmission cycle. Another that we saw earlier, so you remember this, one involves non-human primates. One has a safe, very effective vaccine that's been around since 1936. Most of them do not have vaccines. The incidence and spread of several are going to follow population movements, traveling, moving, shipping of cargo and other goods. Two of these have associated with problems building the Panama Canal. Maybe you've heard about it from that. Most of these are transmitted to a human from a mosquito, and human to human by mosquito. You've got to get it from a human. The mosquito will take it to the next human. It'll do the work for you. One of these, two of these, but one of these in particular that we talked about here is going to be transmitted from human to human. You don't have to go through a mosquito. It can go directly from a human to a human by direct contact. And we've found out that that is very horrible. So many interesting stories that go along with these. And so I'm going to walk you quickly. We're quickly running out of time. Cassie and I were going, we better hurry. So this is the West Nile virus. This is what it looks like when you see it online. There's the vital point. And again, I'm not going to read it. You can read it, but there's the vital point. We're going to give you the cause. It's caused by a flavivirus. We've defined that in our vocabulary in the introduction, but it's given to you there. There is a mosquito vector. There's 65 species of Culex mosquitoes that can carry and transmit West Nile virus. It's currently a pandemic. It's all over the world. And we're seeing it more and more, as we just saw in Arizona, the person calling in from Arizona. It's awful there. Cassie's in South Dakota talks about it a lot. It's a huge problem in many states in the United States and other areas all over the world. Transmission, birds are natural hosts of this virus. The mosquito has to bite the bird, get the virus, and bring it to you. So birds are an indicator. Dead birds, indicator. Bird pathways, indicator. The incidence, it's the leading cause of domestically acquired mosquito-borne diseases in the United States. That's our problem, is West Nile. It's not the same for every country. Some countries have way bigger issues than that, but that's ours in the United States. So it's important that the people you work with know that. That's the one we need to be watching out for and looking for, those Culex mosquitoes because of West Nile. We're going to give you the symptoms when they occur and how often people actually show symptoms and what you can do about it. We're going to give you the treatment, of which there is no vaccine or specific treatment for it. You're going to use over-the-counter things and hospitalization if it gets really bad. General information about that: it came from Uganda. It originated and was identified in the West Nile district. And some more just general information about that. Again, I don't want to read it, but you'll get the idea. And then a little bit of history. It was discovered in 1937, not too long ago, right? Less than 100 years ago, in blood of a woman in the West Nile district of Uganda. And so we give you that information. Then we go on and show you a map. Everyone includes a map. And this is from 2019 from the Centers for Disease Control. And these are the areas, and again, it's limited to the United States in this particular instance, but these are the counties, or it's done by county, but the areas in the United States where West Nile virus is showing up, I think by the end of June, if I'm not mistaken, in the United States. So you can see the Midwest, California, some areas of the East Coast, the areas around Phoenix, Arizona, really getting hammered with a lot of cases of West Nile virus right here in 2019. So again, I could walk you through a few things. We're getting close to being out of time, but we'll get into chikungunya and talk to you about that. We'll do dengue. I just would say a couple things just about dengue to kind of pique your interest. It's the world's most important mosquito-borne viral disease. Malaria is not a virus, right? Malaria is a plasmodium or protozoa. But of the viral ones, dengue is the world's most important one. Its incidence has risen 30-fold in the past 30 years. 40% of the world's people live in areas at risk of dengue. And it's called break-bone fever because it gets into your joints and it aches and you bend over because it hurts. And it's a leading cause of hospitalization and death in the Philippines. I know we have someone that called in from the Philippines. They even talked about they're under a dengue warning right now. It's horrible, and it's very prevalent in Philippines and Thailand as well. We mentioned that in our little guide here. Malaria, it's caused by a parasite that is not a virus. It is not a virus. Malaria means bad air. There are records of it in 1550 BC, historical records of symptoms being discovered from 1550 BC. It's been around forever, and it's still a huge problem. 435 deaths from malaria in the world every year. The history is so incredibly important, how it affected Europe and Asia and the United States. And again, the Panama Canal, you probably heard yellow fever and malaria both mentioned in conjunction with the craziness of building that canal through that forested area, swampy area in Panama. And it's killed a lot of people in the United States, although we don't have a big problem with it right now. But that's the one that led to the CDC. Yellow fever is another one. It's also caused by a virus carried by the Aedes. 90% of all cases of yellow fever are now in Africa. It damages your liver, which then causes your skin and eyes to look yellow because of the jaundice, and they look yellow, and hence the name. There's been a vaccine. It is recommended for people 9 months and older in areas of risk. If you're a traveler, you would tell your people, your patrons at your museum, if you plan to travel to some of these areas, these countries, it is recommended that you get that vaccination. It's not currently a threat in the United States, but it has been, it's the topic of this book in Philadelphia. in 1793. So we've definitely had problems with yellow fever in the United States as well. And the Zika is the one that hit us hard in that 2015-16 epidemic outbreak in Brazil, because that was the time they made the connection between that Zika virus and severe birth defects, particularly the smaller brain and head size of fetuses and then babies when they're born. So that's been a huge, huge impact on a lot of people's lives, and we're still keeping an eye on that. But that just flipped everybody out when that connection was made, because that virus can live in semen, and so during intercourse it can be transmitted. It can be transmitted from the mother to the fetus in amniotic fluid. It's an international health concern. So how can you protect your community? You can inform them and you can educate them about these diseases. What is more compelling as a reason to learn about mosquitoes, to study mosquitoes, to look for mosquitoes, to rid your environment of mosquitoes, than we can maybe alleviate some of these health issues and save somebody from having to endure these horrible diseases. So we want you to follow the protocols and get rid of those breeding sites.
And I think I goofed up. I'm sorry, I forgot to show this one.
Oh, that's okay. You know what? I think you can go back and see this it's the transmission cycle for West Nile. We talked about it involving birds. Crows and jays seem to be high on the list of those birds that are guilty of harboring that and transferring that. But humans are a dead end, and the mosquito can also transfer that to horses when they bite horses for blood. But it's also a dead end victim, meaning that virus will never multiply enough in a human or horse body to allow a mosquito to get enough of it to transfer it. But the bird, it will. And so it will keep going through the bird cycle, giving it to humans, giving it to horses. We suffer from that, but the bird is that key connection. So that was all I was going to say about that. Thank you, Cassie.
Sorry.
No worries.
Okay, so if you haven't already, I'd like to kind of make you aware of some of the resources that we have. And if you haven't been to observer.globe.gov, here's where we have our toolkit. And a toolkit is available for clouds, mosquitoes, for land cover, and for trees. And simply you do Globe Observer. It will take you to mosquitoes and then Mosquito Resource Library. And we have tutorials, we have infographics, interactive EPUB readers that you can put on an iPad, the things that you can download and print, step-by-step, how to use the mosquito habitat mapper tutorial. We have activities, such as how to do a mosquito walk, where to put some traps, how to build a mosquito trap. We have reference materials, links to some videos that we felt were very useful if you were doing a presentation. And then we have 3 WorldCat book lists, one for children, one for young adults and adults, and then one for citizen scientists. And just to kind of give you an idea of the other things in our toolkit, we have the disease guides will be up there by the end of the week. We have an interactive bingo game with 40 different bingo cards in a PowerPoint that you can, for a call sheet. And if you're not allowed to, if bingo is perceived as gambling, we have alternative ways to use these boards with different activities. And then we also developed 6 different mosquito tellers that are kind of like the fortune teller where you fold them and then ask questions. But we have some rules and guidelines that are printed on the front. And on the back side, we have how to pronounce the words Aedes aegypti and albopictus and Culex. We also are proud to host the Zika zine, which is developed from UCAR, and it's a mosquito cartoon series developed by Dr. Lisa Gardner. Complementing both the mosquito teller and the Zika zine, we have blank ones where if you're leading an activity or have used them with children and they like to go further and do their own, we have blank templates that you can use, both to develop your own mosquito teller and go further with Wanda, Hector, and Maurice, the heroes of the Zika zine. And then Dr. Rusty Lowe has been a scientist, consultant, and contributor to the Smithsonian version or activity of mosquitoes, is part of a larger curriculum material that they have. And that's also referenced and available in our toolkit. So in summary, we would recommend, if you have the time, to watch the 40-minute video from which I took the section for the presentation. This entire presentation and PowerPoint will be uploaded within 24 hours to our Globe Mission Mosquito website, which I'll reference in just a moment. We would recommend you download and use the Mosquito Habitat Mapper to document steps 1 and 2, document the potential breeding habitats, to observe any larvae that might be in water, to sample and count, and if possible, to eliminate the water source. If you have oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Kathy, I was going to interrupt you for 1 second, and just to give a nod and a thank you to Sam. There's Sam, I guess it's Sam, about the breeding site, because we used it again here, and he did make the note. No, mosquitoes do not breed in the water. They usually breed in flight, and the female will then rest for a few days afterwards. Anyway, yes, there's a lot more to the biology of that, and they lay their eggs in the water site or near the water, right above the water line or directly into the water. So I apologize. I guess we should really be more careful about saying that. It is a little misleading. That is not where they breed. So thank you, Sam. We will be a little more careful about that. That's a great point. Thank you.
And you're right. Yes, thank you. We would also encourage you to visit, and you can download the app, the Mosquito Habitat Mapper app, from the Globe Observer site. Take a look at the toolkit. There are, like I mentioned, there will be the disease guides and lots of additional resources that are available for you to use in your library, museum program, or in your classroom. Oops. And the website to get to our campaign page on the Globe site, where we have some additional resources, and we have an amazing science blog that if you'd like to read and contribute and comment on. All it takes to join any of these programs is your email address and to log on as a citizen scientist, and you're welcome to download and look at anything we have. So at our next Citizen Science webinar on August 21st at 2 p.m. Eastern, Dr. Lisa Gardner, who created the Zika zine, will be sharing the science behind it. She's not only the illustrator, but she's also the author. So she'll be online. And our next education webinar is Around the World with Mission Mosquito. That one is August 7th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. And as always, we ask that you pre-register so we have an idea of who is coming, and we do appreciate you very much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I hope you use the guide. I think you'll find it worthwhile to share with your other citizen science friends. So thank you so much, you guys.
Yep, and we welcome your comments and suggestions for improvements. If you would like to, we have our email addresses. You're welcome to email us at any time.